Thank you for watching True Crime Time, everybody. I'm a little fired up tonight. I was watching some other channels and reading some of the live chat. The channels, it wasn't the channels, content. It was some of the chat. I'm not going to bring it up in my live tonight, but it's definitely something I will talk about in my next members only live next week. But there were some things that I read tonight that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I will talk more about that. I'm not going to get into it again in this video. There's plenty to talk about in this video, but it was, there's certain boundaries, right, in the case, I think. That's all I'm going to say. So again, next week, keep an eye out, members. Angel, I know you're a member, been a member for a long time. Good to see you. We'll have a members only live. If you're interested in joining everybody, check out the link in my channel, and it'd be great to see you there. So for tonight's video, let me refocus here a little bit. I'm going to kind of go back to my previous video a little bit where we were talking about how Bryan's life was kind of coming full circle from when he was younger in high school and kind of starting to go off track again, in my opinion. So I think that there were signs very early on with Bryan. We've heard other channels discussing, kind of his past as well, and his family's awareness of things that have maybe happened with Bryan, or whatever it is they know about Bryan's past. And I definitely think that could be the case here. So I think Bryan was doing what he could do to try to stay on track, going to school, pursuing a degree, and trying to kind of put on that, that front of doing the right thing. And part of him was probably trying to do the right thing, but I think there were these underlying things that were eating at him. And as his life kind of came back around and things started going off track, we were talking about how that could have kind of boiled to a head. And then he finally reached the point where he went through with something that he had been thinking about, I think, for a long time. One thing I was talking about was how somebody is bothered when they aren't getting the respect or the recognition for things that they think they should be getting that recognition for. Like I said, it doesn't matter if, you don't think you're very good at playing the violin and somebody says you're no good at playing the violin. That's not going to really bother you. But when it comes to things like in his classes, when he always had to prove that he was not only equal to his peers, but smarter, right? And, eyewitnesses who've described Bryan have said that he, had a very complex way of explaining things and was trying to prove how intelligent he was. And so I think there could be some underlying personality things with Bryan that, it's complicated. There's no way we can diagnose Bryan. Don't get me wrong. This is just, from looking from the outside, things that we've heard about with Bryan that you can kind of apply to this case and put it together as you're looking at what was going on in his life. And, it's possible there was substance abuse involved, and those things were contributing to him kind of spiraling out of control. So that kind of brings us to, the act of committing the murders. And I wonder, and I don't have the answer to some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight, and that's why I enjoy everybody being here, is we can discuss it. But I wonder, when did Bryan actually decide he was going to commit this murder? Maybe he had fantasized, I think, in the past about this type of crime and kind of, being bothered by the lack of respect he was getting and being bypassed for these positions in law enforcement that he was pursuing, and just things not going his way. All of these things kind of compiling. But when did he actually kind of think in his mind, I'm going to go to this house and I'm going to do this? And that's one question. I put it in the chat if you have any opinion on that, on, do you think this was July, right after he got there, a month later? Could this, or do you think this was closer to when the murders happened? And, so, essentially what I'm asking is, do you think he was planning this for 4 months or more? Or do you think this was something that he decided in that kind of 30-day window that this is the house, I'm going to do it, and it's going to happen? Or do you think it was even a shorter spurt of the moment? I'm interested to hear everybody's thoughts on that. Because that kind of leads us up into, the night of the murders and kind of, what was his reason for it? What was, what were his motives, and what was his mindset going into the house? And that's very intriguing to me as well. I don't know if we have the answer on if it was one person who was the target, if everybody, if it was the house. I have some thoughts on it that I'm going to share tonight. And then, once he's in the house, I think there's some interesting things to discuss. And one of the most intriguing things to me about the case, or mysteries about the case, is that phrase that we've heard in the PCA, that Dylan said she heard a male voice say something to the effect, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And there were only two males in the house at that time. So it had to have been either Ethan or the perpetrator, or Bryan Kohberger. And so there's a couple of talking points I wanted to bring up. Now, I noticed earlier, right at the beginning of the video, I believe it was Jeff, you had mentioned, you kind of felt it may have been Ethan said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," after he came upon Xana on the floor, not realizing the killer was in the room with Xana. Interesting. That's, when you look at it being Ethan who said it, that would make sense, right? The reason why Ethan would say it would be pretty straightforward. It would probably be him saying it to Xana, right? I don't think he would be saying it to anybody else in that situation. And so when you look at it from the perspective of, was it Ethan? I think that would be one of the reasons you could argue that it was him. But I do have, I guess, some questions on that theory that I'll share with you coming up here as well. So, Bryan's kind of, building up to this crime, and what I think happened here is, I think that he chose the house prior for observation. I think he had moved to this new area, and we'd heard stories about Bryan trying to kind of fit in with his cohorts in class. And again, a cohort is a group of students who are studying the same things together. But in general, Bryan would have been trying to fit in this new area that he had moved to. And he'd gone to this pool party, and his neighbor/friend kind of described how Bryan was a bit awkward. There were a couple of people who talked about that. And so Bryan had this kind of period of time here where he was trying to fit in this new area. And I imagine that he would have been driving around probably and exploring the area. We know Bryan likes to drive around and explore. I don't think the defense would argue that. And so he's probably observing. One thing that his neighbor had mentioned was how he had briefly met Bryan, and then a while later they saw each other again, and Bryan kind of acted like they'd known each other for quite a while, and he kind of remembered everything about him. So Bryan was very smart and very observant. So I think he would have been observant to everything around him, and been driving around and exploring, definitely going over to Moscow and knowing this Greek Row area and being so close to this college life for so long, and probably wanting to fit in and trying to fit in for quite a while. Now, he was going to school online, so I think that, helped him get a little further before having issues. Once he kind of got back into that in-person schooling and having to interact, things quickly kind of, spiraled out on him. So I think he's driving around, and I think he's paying attention to what's going on, and he's interested in the life of, the lifestyle going on. There's parties, there's pretty girls all over the place. And I think he's driving around, and he's going to places like Greek Row, and he's watching, and he's driving, and he sees a house, right? Or maybe he hears of it, or he just, finds out word of mouth about things, but there's a house, and, it's not just the 4 people who were murdered that frequent this house. There's a lot of young, attractive girls who go to this house. And there's a lot of photos on Instagram that Kaylee and Maddie and Xana, Dylan, everybody had been posting, where they would have parties there, and they would be out on the balcony, and they would, a lot of, these kind of sorority girls. Here's this house that's got this easy access to just kind of drive by and watch. And I think he may have driven through that Greek Row area and kind of initially maybe just identified the house and the activity there, and then maybe had zeroed in on who was living at the house as he was watching, or maybe saw somebody there that piqued his interest and And then he started kind of, looking into who lived there, rather than the kind of idea of him, crossing paths necessarily with one of the victims at the restaurant or in another location. Maybe he, initially was just looking at this whole area. He kind of zeroes in on this house full of these girls, and somebody like him, maybe with this, fantasy or infatuation with that. We don't know the underlying, this is just a theory. Again, I have to clarify every now and then. We don't know this might, just some thoughts here, but, maybe he zeroes in on this house. And then from there, he kind of focuses in on maybe a singular target from there. Maybe there was one particular girl that he, was most attracted to for whatever reason, or focused in on, or maybe not. But I think it's very possible that he had looked at the house first and then kind of, became obsessed from there. And, over these months that things were kind of spinning on him, it was building up, and then you start having these thoughts, and then he decides to go through with it. So that's just kind of wrapping up my previous live there on just kind of leading up to when the murders happened. Now we don't know, if he went into the house to attack one person or four people. We don't know. What does everybody think, though? I'm going to scan the comments here. I want to get a feel for the audience. Tell me if you think it was one person. Just put a 1 if you think it was one person he was focusing on, and put a 4 or a 2 or something if you think he went in there with the idea that he was going to attack the 4 people that he attacked, or something else. Let me know what you think. One target. So yeah, most people feel one target. And so that's part of what I want to talk through tonight as well is, we don't know. I don't know the answer. Right? We don't know if it was 1, if it was 4, but I have some thoughts on it and some questions. I just kind of want to go through here. Maybe we can answer them together. So KJ, interesting. So KJ says, I think he was after 2 of them. So, maybe it was Maddie and Kaylee. Maybe he had followed them on Instagram and saw the 2 of them together often. And the question I would have on that is, did he know Kaylee was there? And again, this is kind of another mystery of what was he doing before the murders from, 5 p.m. up until 2 a.m. We haven't heard or we don't know what Bryan was doing in those hours, or if there was anything that happened, but yeah, maybe he had chosen 2. Yeah. Sirius says, possibly 2. So a couple people think 2. Some people think 1. Yeah, it's a mystery, right? It just kind of the way it happened. So let's talk through a couple things. So really quick, I want to review the just what Dylan had initially said here. So, she went to bed in her bedroom, and she woke up about 4 o'clock, and she thought she heard something upstairs, like Kaylee playing with her dog. And then a little while later, she said she heard who she thought was Kaylee say something to the effect of "there's someone here." And this is interesting to me because they mentioned how Xana, it could have been Xana, right? Because she was on her phone. But Kaylee and Xana have very different voices. If you've watched that body cam of the 2 of them on 2 different interactions with police, Xana has a little more of a raspy voice, and Kaylee has kind of a higher pitch voice. And so it's curious to me, that law enforcement would say that it could be Xana. I kind of lean to what Dylan would have thought the voice matched being Kaylee. So I almost feel like the person who said that would have been Kaylee. I think she could have distinguished between Xana and Kaylee's voices. So I feel like that was the person who may have alerted there's somebody here. And that kind of brings me to, back to the Ethan theory regarding if it was Ethan who said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," because I also think that Dylan may have recognized Ethan's voice. Had it been him who said, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," I feel like Dylan would have stated, "I heard Ethan say this," because she would have known it's his voice. So the fact that they kind of say it as she heard a male voice say it, as if it's unrecognizable. Because, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of trying to decipher this, but I feel like had it been Ethan who said that, she would have recognized that. And then I also think a little bit about how, if it were Ethan, how loud would he be saying it? So remember, when we talk about where the Xana and Ethan were kind of in their room where they were found compared to where Dylan is, if Ethan were saying to Xana, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," I don't know if he would necessarily be saying it at a level that Dylan would have heard it. It would have been to Xana. Maybe she would have. I mean, around the corner there, though, I almost feel like it makes more sense that it would have been a louder level of voice that she heard that said it. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit more here with my thoughts on this coming up. But so when I think of it being Ethan, just to kind of wrap that up, my thoughts are Dylan would have recognized his voice and would have said it was Ethan. And then the other was, had he been talking to Xana, would it been at a level that Dylan would have heard across, maybe faintly. But we did know that there was audio recording from the house next door that picked up sounds. So they were loud enough for that camera to pick them up as well. And we don't know everything that Dylan heard. And what's described that she said is something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." So it's not necessarily exactly what she heard. She may have described it differently. She may not have heard exactly what was said, but something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Yeah. So Olivia, it's a great point. I mean, we don't know the details. We're just kind of theorizing, trying to kind of, put it together and talk through some different angles, see what makes sense. So Holly doesn't think so. So if it were Ethan, it could have been him, helping Xana. It could be. We don't know. It could have been, but those are just, when I think about it, that's a very intriguing part of what happened in the house. And I think what Dylan heard, I do think she heard more than we know. I think that could be important, when it comes around to the trial, or could have been important during the investigation with helping them figure it. I think she heard more, and who knows how good of a look she got of the person and what kind of description she could. And think of it again, if she did hear a voice, it's possible that she could now match that voice to Bryan's voice, just like they did in the Alex Murdaugh case, when they had the voice on, in the background of the video. And, that came up in the trial, it could come around as well. And maybe she could be asked, hey, did the voice you hear match his voice? And if she were to say, yeah, that's him, she's an eyewitness, and, you have that whole layer in the trial, but that is a possibility. So I do think, there was this kind of buildup that happened and this thought process that was going on with Bryan, and, things started going off track, and he decided this was going to happen. And so when I think about, okay, was it one person? I have some past videos on this as well. I have one about, what if it was just Maddie being his target? He went in there with the purpose of targeting Maddie. He wasn't expecting Kaylee to be there, or Kaylee interrupted him. And that was before we actually knew the timeline of the murder. So that video, I was kind of looking at it from the perspective of, we didn't know, we hadn't heard that information yet on, it being from essentially, 409 to 419, 8, 9, 10 minute window there, when it could have happened. So at that time, we didn't know how long Bryan could have been in the house, or, what time he had gotten there. So it was kind of an unknown there. And so the idea was, he could have potentially gone there to, sneak into one room and been interrupted. And then, Kaylee yells, there's somebody here. And then things kind of go crazy from there. Right. So, that is a possibility. He may have gone in just to target one person. Well, may have just been Maddie. Now, I do think that he went upstairs first and attacked Kaylee and Maddie first, and then went downstairs. And that's where it gets a little bit confusing. There is kind of, that decision that he makes when he gets down at the bottom of the stairs. So, Dylan's description of him walking past towards the back door matches up with him leaving, and it kind of goes along with the timeline. So, I think we're pretty confident that Bryan entered the house, went upstairs first, then came downstairs, and then attacked Xana and Ethan. And so when you look at it from the perspective of, okay, was he just going there to attack Maddie? Okay, so if he were just going there to attack Maddie, and then all of a sudden Kaylee's there, right off the bat, his plan is messed up, right? He wasn't expecting that if he's just going there for Maddie. And so he walks in, and all of a sudden Kaylee's there, and, he's surprised. And so he attacks both of them. Well, at that point, right, his mission is accomplished. He's gotten his target, the one person, plus the other person who was there by surprise. And at that point, you would almost think, he'd be out and get out. But for whatever reason, he comes downstairs and he continues on. So if he just had one target, it's curious to me how it went from one target to four. And so if we look here, he would have come down the stairs. And you can see there, right there, I mean, that's 3 or 4 steps for Bryan to go out that back door, that sliding glass door. If that's where he came in, very good chance he left it open. But that's 3-4 steps and he's out. So he targets. But instead, he comes down and he turns right and he goes over to this side of the house, all the way down to the hall, to attack Ethan and Xana. So it makes me wonder, if he was just there to attack Maddie, or Maddie and Kaylee, why didn't he take the left when he had the chance? Why did he choose to continue after Xana and then continue on with Ethan as well? He could have escaped. Even if Xana had come around the corner and had seen him standing there, he could have gone out and escaped, and he still would have accomplished going in there after his one target, and he would have had a much cleaner getaway. I mean, he still would have left the knife sheath. I gotta post that one. But he left the knife sheath, of course, but he still could have, who knows what kind of evidence he may have left in Xana and Ethan's room, maybe even with an encounter with Ethan, the only male victim, right? Who may have been able to put up a bit more of a fight. Now, I don't think there was, much of, I think there might have been effort to fight back. But again, in a situation like that with somebody armed with that kind of a weapon, they would not have stood a chance. And so who knows though, what evidence may have been left behind in Ethan and Xana's room, but he could have turned left and gotten right out. No problem. But he didn't. He kept going. And so that's what makes me feel like he was going in there with the idea of killing more than just one person. And I think, when he's looking at the house initially, and he kind of focuses in on the house as a target, not necessarily a target for this crime early on, maybe just a target to watch and drive around. We know he was driving around leading up to the murders. So maybe it's just, the house initially, and then, he focuses in on some of the residents. And then when he decides to go through with this crime, he kind of knows who's there. So there is somewhat of a target. He kind of has an awareness of who's in the house. But in general, if it was just one person, why didn't he just go in and out? So it makes me think that he kind of took out this kind of building up, frustration, rage, anger, this kind of, all of these things that, were eating at him. And he kind of took it out on the house, but with this kind of knowledge of who was there. And he may have even had specific targets within that, right? But I think, initially the house is kind of what drew him in and became his location for the crime. So remember, he did that survey, and he talks about feedback and things from people who have committed crimes, and he talks about how did you choose your target in that survey. And I think, he had chosen his target before he chose, the specifics on who was there. I think he kind of settled on that location. But let me know what everybody thinks about that. I mean, again, these are my thoughts. When I look at his actions in the house and the way that he moved through the house, I just can't wrap my mind around if he was kind of just like, boom, I got her. Wow, there was somebody else there I wasn't expecting, but I'm out of here. But he continued on. So that brings us to the comment of, it's okay, I'm going to help you. And so some of the background I talked about with Bryan, with his law enforcement background, I think he was not getting the respect that he desired in his life. I think he saw himself, held himself on a higher pedestal and had some insecurity issues. And I think he was struggling with his ego and his super ego and a lot of internal things and past, challenges and underlying conditions and all of these things kind of, it's complicated. We don't know, but all of these things kind of contributing, to who Bryan Kohberger is. It's hard to really answer it with one thing. I think it's just so complicated. We'll never really know. But you have all these things going on, but this underlying law enforcement, this desire, and think about back when he was working as a security guard. And there was that incident with the woman who almost died, and they saved her. And Bryan was a part of that. Apparently, we don't know the whole story on that, but that is an interesting one as well. But so that happens, and somebody else kind of gets that recognition, right? Bryan didn't really get called out as the hero in that. If you go and research what happened there was another security guard there who kind of got the recognition for being the one who was calm and collected and did the right thing. And so that's just another example of something that kind of slighted Bryan, right? That just adds on to these other things that are piling up and going on in his life. And now he moves to this new place, and then he's getting passed over. He's having confrontations with his professor. It all kind of, boils to a head. And then he goes through with something that he'd been considering. But he had done that survey that talks about, picking the target first. And so I think a lot of thought went into that. And he again, when you choose your target or when you choose the location of a crime, it's going to be somewhere comfortable, right? So he's going to go somewhere comfortable and familiar. And I think that's what drew him to that house. Yeah. So KJ says, Bryan made an effort to try and fit into society and couldn't hack it. I think he made an effort. I don't think he was, weird guy in the corner staring at people. It sounds like he was talkative, but he was just, they were awkward. He probably, hard to see it when we just watch videos and things, but seeing him in person, multiple people have said it. So you just, there's not a lot of people coming forward saying, no, I knew Bryan. The guy's awesome. Cool guy, man. We used to go hang out every Friday night and, go down to the bar, real ladies man. Yeah, he's a really good guy. He comes and helps my grandma there's nobody, right, coming up and saying anything like that about Bryan. It's all these kind of like, yeah, the guy was kind of awkward. He was a little bit edgy, he was aggressive. That these are the things that we're hearing about his character, and character witnesses are relevant, right? Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point there. Their family has a lot of psychology in their background and things, and so within the household there, and if Bryan were struggling with things, there could definitely be some domestic abuse, I'll say, that could have happened in Bryan's past. And that's very common, right? With people who go on to commit crimes like this. And also people who are connected to law enforcement and kind of those things, there's some underlying things there with in regards to control, I think, and feeling important and almost having this kind of hero complex. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring up with the comment of it's okay, I'm going to help you, is if it were Bryan. So let's look at it. We talked about if it were Ethan. Let's look at it from the perspective of if it were Bryan who said, it's okay, I'm going to help you. And I think, there's a couple of things, but I think if you can answer, who said that and why, that would just answer so many questions in this case, right? On either way, if it was Ethan and you could say, yeah, he's the one who said it, it would kind of help you lay out how the crime unfolded. And if it's Bryan who said it, that opens up a whole Pandora's box of personality, things and other, motives behind maybe what was going on in his head. But imagine if, Bryan were the one to say that. And I've kind of thought through a couple of scenarios. One, for example, let's say he came down the stairs and Xana were there and he had gone into the house initially to kind of do this blitz attack. So his intention wasn't necessarily to go after one person, but whoever he could get in a short period of time, quickly, as cleanly as possible. And so I think it's possible he went in and went upstairs and started his attack. It wouldn't have taken very long, came downstairs and then continued his attack. And that's why he would have turned right and went down to that other side of the house. But it's possible when he came down the stairs that he saw Xana there and then potentially even chased her or attacked her there in the hallway as she was maybe trying to retreat back to the bedroom. And so I think of a couple scenarios where Bryan may have said that phrase. And one of the scenarios is if Xana had locked herself in the room or even the bathroom, I've thought about, because when you read the affidavit, it's kind of curious to me as well how the officer, I think it's Officer Payne, describes walking into the house and he talks about going toward Ethan and Xana's room. And he specifically mentions that there's a bathroom door on the hallway there, wondering if it could have been damaged or even Xana's door could have been damaged. So if Xana had retreated to her bedroom and shut the door and locked the door, I could imagine maybe if Bryan were on the other side trying to kind of, chase after this person and get into that room and using that phrase as a way to kind of, fool the target, and so that's one idea I had. It's like, could he have been chasing her? She shuts the door. And then it's described based off of the audio being recorded at the neighbors that there's a loud thud. So a loud thud has to be loud enough for that camera to pick it up probably 40 feet away. But it's described as a loud thud. So what would make a loud thud in the house? Put that, if you don't mind, everybody, put in the comments for me when they describe in the PCA that the audio picked up what sounded like voices, muffled voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. What do you think the loud thud was? Before I go on, I'll check the comments real quick for that. So I don't know what else would make a loud thud other than a door being busted open. That would be loud. I would describe that as loud. But they specifically say a loud thud. And so imagine what's happening there. So you have Dylan in the room kind of describing that she's hearing a male voice say this. She's hearing crying and whimpering. She's hearing something happen there. And she hears something to the effect of, it's okay, I'm going to help you. So it was loud enough that Dylan heard it pretty clearly, maybe not perfectly, but she heard it something to the effect of. It may have been, something else, along those lines, but something to the effect of, it's okay, I'm going to help you. What if it was, it's okay, I'm a police officer, I'm going to help you. There could be something else in there that we don't know. So some people are talking about falling and a thud, a person falling. And I'm glad I kind of anticipated that might be another theory. So, yeah, a trunk door slamming, Xana being knocked to the floor with a thud. Mary says, I always thought it was Xana's door, but the bathroom door would make sense. Either one, right? So when I say bathroom door, for example, if let's say Xana did walk around the corner and saw Bryan standing there and took off the other way, maybe she did cut into that bathroom and lock the door right there because it's closer. If he were right there, right? So, and then maybe that's the door that was busted. But it is interesting that they described that in the walkthrough of the house. That he says, I noticed a bathroom door on the left side of the hall. It's for a moment there, I was like, man, was the door even like busted down? But so Olivia says, so again, it could be a door. It could be the bathroom door. It could be the bedroom door being busted open. Olivia says, loud thud falling into a wall, right? So a person falling. So I'm going to show a video here and just a precursor. It is a little bit graphic. So just it's a short video. It's only about 30 seconds here, but this is in regards to the theory of it being somebody falling. And I think that's a very possible thing. And if Ethan were a bigger person, he was pretty tall. He's a pretty good sized person. He could have made a significant noise had he fallen over. So I'm going to show you this video. And this video is of a person standing out here on a patio. And somebody's going to come up and just stab him one time in the leg. And the guy barely even is fazed by being stabbed in the leg. But you'll see how quickly he goes from just standing there after being stabbed to being flat on his back. And when we talk about a loud thud, this is also a possibility when you look at it from the angle of it was a person maybe falling to the ground. So again, it's a bit graphic. I do blur it out here. So it's not going to show anything too bad, but you can see here. So he's been stabbed in the leg here and he's bleeding really badly where that black square is. And you can see he just kind of looks down and he doesn't even realize, what's happening here. And he's going to get his phone. But watch how quickly here he goes from just standing here to just being flat on his back here. And so you can see there the way he fell was, just straight back, right? Just straight back to his back. So if you think about somebody who's losing blood at a very quick rate, that's how it happens, everybody. That it's very fast. And that brings me back to the conversation earlier about, these attacks and defensive wounds and, things like that. These were very fast attacks. That was one stab wound in somebody's artery on their leg. And we know there were multiple wounds in this case. So, so it is possible. It is possible that the loud thud was somebody falling over. If it's not that, then it's possible it could be a door being knocked open if Xana were able to kind of lock herself into one of the rooms. There's so many things to think about with this case, everybody. It's, you can break this down, from why to how, and yeah, so Bo says hitting the wall with heavy force. Yeah, a struggle happening, possibly. Yeah, that's a good point. So when you talk about the phrase, it's okay, I'm going to help you. That's one idea I've had is, maybe he was using that as a way to kind of fool his targets in the moment. There could be other underlying reasons, though, when you kind of look at his law enforcement background and does he have some psychological things going on there that maybe he's looking to feel powerful and feel in control and feel like the hero? Maybe there's a bit of a hero complex going on here and he wants, that's kind of part of his, process here with what he's doing. So that's another angle. It could have been something that he's almost taunting with, right? Or intimidating his victims with, kind of a power play. Could also be him just talking to himself, right? A lot of times when people commit crimes like this, like mass murders, they'll say things out loud to themselves, whatever's playing in their head, they'll whatever that fantasy is, whatever it is that's going on, they'll say things out loud during the commission of the crime. Yeah, so Pauly says quick blood loss from major veins or arteries being slashed would cause a body drop, definitely. And Ethan was a pretty big guy. And it's interesting the way they describe the wounds on the victims. So with Xana, it's mentioned, he noticed that it was caused by an edged weapon. And so in my opinion, that is not necessarily a stab wound. I think what he observed was probably more of a slash type wound or gash. I don't know where, but he doesn't necessarily say that he noticed Xana had been killed by stabbing. He says caused by an edged weapon. And then they go on to describe Ethan's injuries as being sharp force injuries, which is more in line with stabbing. So that kind of is the other piece that made me think of the theory of, could Xana have encountered Bryan there, and that as she came around the corner and been wounded, right, and been slashed and then retreated, and then there was kind of a moment there where she was wounded and Bryan's saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Maybe the door's busted open and then he attacks Xana and Ethan in the bedroom. Yeah, so Harlot says they were all on their feet and aware. I do think, I think, possibly Maddie and Kaylee were caught by surprise and maybe just had a quick moment. But I think Xana heard Kaylee say there's someone here and was alerted, and very possible that she was coming to investigate. If Ethan were asleep, could have been Xana coming to investigate what she heard. And then there was this moment where Bryan comes down the stairs and Xana's coming around that corner and there's an encounter there. Even if Bryan's going in to have this blitz attack, he comes down the stairs. He just got two victims. He could have left. So he either went right to continue on and he got two more victims, or he saw one right there, right? And that prompted him to kind of go that direction, attack two more people, and then he left. And I think what happened was, after that fourth person, the dog's barking, I think it was a blitz type of attack, and he decided, it was in and out, right? And it was time to go. With things getting louder, there was just a struggle. Now there's a male in the house that he may or may not have been expecting. And so now it was time to kind of retreat and escape. And so that's where I think Bryan's a little bit different as well, when you talk about somebody who's like an incel, or, a school shooter or something like that, who commits their crime and then kind of waits for the police to show up, right? And then whatever happens, he wanted to escape. So he wanted to get away. He had put some thought into this. He had put some planning into this. And so this wasn't, I'm going to go and do this crime and that's going to kind of be my big hurrah. This was, I'm going to do this crime and I'm going to get out and get away with it. And so when we ask that question, why did he leave after the fourth victim? Why did he leave Dylan behind? It was time to go, right? It was time to get out of there. And I think he had, either I'm going to go upstairs and attack this one person, maybe two, comes downstairs. Now there's another person, but I think it was an in and out plan, kind of a blitz attack, however many he could get, maybe. But I think once the dog starts barking and you've encountered another guy, and we don't know, we were just talking about a possible struggle, maybe, that now it's time to kind of get out of there and go. And he knew he had a small window of time. He planned for, I think, a small period of time to get in and out of there. I almost think he may have planned his window thinking that cell phone data only refreshes in a certain, period. I was researching some of the cell phone analysis that they do. And there's certain situations where towers only refresh like every 15 minutes. And so I think he may have even in his mind thought he had kind of structured things with this 15-minute window to get in and out of the house. And at that point, it was time to go. Again, just, we don't know, but just kind of a blitz attack went in. This thing kind of unfolds, and now it's time to retreat and get away and finish, get out of there and now go try to cover it up. Yeah, so Melissa mentions PTK. A lot of similarities, if you compare the two, looking at it from that kind of mindset on what could be underlying there. There's connections to him studying criminology. And it's hard with Bryan with the studying of criminology. I've heard people say, like, why would he make these mistakes? He's a criminal mastermind. He's going for his PhD in criminology, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. When you pursue a PhD in criminology, there's different avenues you pursue. They're not necessarily all around being a professional criminal, and you're taking courses and things. And Bryan may have just been good at taking classes. I think he was smart, obviously, and analytical, but again, he was just starting his PhD journey. This was his opportunity and he blew it. He didn't necessarily get to the PhD level just yet, like we initially had thought. Yeah, so Holly, they do describe, so Holly asked, is it true that his car had a shovel? They do describe a shovel. I don't think that's, I guess it's interesting, yeah, he has a shovel, but he does live in a place where there's snow, and it's common to have a shovel in those kinds of places. There were also hiking boots that were discovered in the car. Just some normal stuff. Nothing really, as far as the items in his car, there wasn't a whole lot that stood out there. I think the evidence from the car that we're waiting for are the findings on the scrub. They're going to be checking things like the gas pedal. They're going to disassemble the gas pedal. They're going to disassemble where the key goes in, the seatbelt boot, the thing where the seatbelt goes up inside there. They disassemble all of those things, and they're going to be going through that very carefully. We don't know what they'll find. They didn't find anything unusual just in his car. Obviously, he would have been smart enough, I think, to hide any evidence like that. I do think it's possible, though, that they have him on camera somewhere cleaning up evidence or cleaning his car or, somewhere, because they could probably look back knowing when the crimes were committed and look at the days and look for footage around the area in Pullman and Moscow and also out there in Pennsylvania to see what Bryan was up to in those days. He could be on video at a car wash somewhere. So who knows what they have. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of video footage. I don't know if there's 51 terabytes of, a lot of that is, the 3D imaging of the crime scene that they take, but 50 terabytes is a lot. I don't know if there's 50 terabytes of him just in the neighborhood of Moscow. So there's got to be other video footage and other data out there connecting him. Yeah, so I don't think the shovel is necessarily too unusual. It's convenient, though, right? It'd be convenient if he were to bury evidence. I'm not sure if I see Bryan as a barrier of evidence, though. For whatever reason, I kind of see him more as a in the water type guy. But yeah, the majority of it is video. Who knows what video? Big hearing tomorrow, everybody, coming up. So we'll have to see. I'm not going to speculate really on what they're going to do or say with these proceedings, but again, it's more legal positioning, and it sounds like we're getting a little bit closer to something happening here and moving forward. So we'll see. Quick shout out to my precinct members, everybody. Again, next week we'll be doing a members only live. So I'll share what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. So another thing, I'm also going to be, just a heads up, everybody, on Friday, I'll be joining the Drunk Turkey Show again as a guest. They were nice enough to invite me back, and so I'm really looking forward to that. So be sure to tune into that. I'll send a reminder on my channel. I'll post a reminder in the link for everybody. That'll be Friday evening. Just scanning the chat here. Yeah, so good point here. Kim says, thank you for not attacking me for my questions or opinions or statements. Yes, please, it's okay if you think Bryan's innocent. It's okay if you think he's guilty. Just be polite. Pretty easy. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, those chats. Yeah, it's funny. Whoops. Angel says, wear a bulletproof vest for the chats. Yeah, it's crazy. Welcome, Melissa. Thank you for joining. Saturn says, I'm never overly biased about anything. Well, a few things, maybe. A few things, but I try to stick to at least, what we read in the documents, and, and that's a little bit about what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. There's some boundaries there, right? That I think you just don't bring up or go down in regards to certain people in the case. And so I definitely try to stick to things we can read and research and things. I'm not big on, you got anybody who watches my channel, I'm not big on rumors and chasing rumors. There's got to be connections, right? It's got to make sense. Thank you, Holly. I'm glad you found the channel. So yeah, I think there's a couple of angles there with who could have said it. I kind of lean that it may have been Bryan. I just don't know if Ethan would have said it loud enough. And I think Dylan would have recognized Ethan's voice. And so just the idea that it could have been Bryan who said that phrase, it's okay, I'm going to help you. I mean, I've thought about that many times, why would somebody say that? So, I mean, drop it in the chat, everybody. If you have any ideas on why or who said it, or if you have any ideas on why Ethan may have said it that I missed, don't be shy, drop it in there. I know you have to subscribe to comment. It's okay, just subscribe and then wait a few minutes and then you can comment. So yeah, so Mike says he's twisted. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. I think that's part of why we're also very interested in this case. It's so intriguing on so many levels, trying to figure it out. And I mean, even if you're on the side of he's innocent, right? I mean, imagine that, right? Imagine if all of a sudden something comes out in the trial and we all step back and go, whoa, it wasn't Bryan, right? I mean, that would be crazy, right? And then that would just, pretty much cement this as the wildest case ever, right? Yeah, Heather says, this is a good comment here. Check out last year's hearing. It's always good to look back, and kind of reread things once you learn new things and kind of put it in a new perspective. Definitely enjoy doing that. And sometimes you have kind of aha moments for sure. You something else kind of comes to mind. Yeah, so Mike says there would be a BK movie in a couple of years. Yeah, I mean, I think there's already a TV show or something or series. I have a hard time watching some of those, depending on who the actors are and things like that. I'm very picky about that. But so Angel asks, do you think no trail from the crime scene could be because so many cars and people trampled the parking lot outside that morning? Yeah, it's possible that there wasn't anything that they were able to pick up. It sounds so. In regards to the attacks as well, when we think about, I think, blood evidence, and that's kind of what we would probably be expecting, right? We would expect footprints or something leading out of the house. We do know they found footprints in the house. They've only mentioned a footprint in order to support the eyewitness account of what she saw in the request of the warrants, right, to get Bryan. And so what they're doing there is they're supporting their account of what happened by mentioning that footprint. But if you think about it, if there's one footprint that far toward the exit, there's more than likely there's going to be other footprints up to that point. And so there's probably some footprints there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of pooled blood, I guess, that would have transferred to the outside necessarily, that they would have been able to, they would have found. So if you think about it, if he is attacking somebody, it's going to be very fast. I think sometimes when we think of these knife attacks, you imagine these movies where the person's like standing there, and then like there's just like blood flying everywhere. And that's not what's going to happen. Is there's going to be these punctures that happen. And often it's not until a short time after the attack where that blood pools out, right? It's going to, depending on where they're hit, but it's not necessarily going to be flying. And it doesn't necessarily mean that Bryan's going to be stepping around in these pools of blood. He, if anything, he might be standing stationary and attacking and then moving away from the site of the attack. And so I don't necessarily think the bottom of his shoes would have picked up a lot of blood evidence per se that would have transferred to the outside, maybe just barely enough that they were able to detect it. I think it was actually on a return visit, maybe, that they even detected it. So it was faint. But I think that's why. I think the bottom of the shoes necessarily isn't, unless he had spent time at the crime scene walking around, like in cases where somebody breaks into a house and attacks somebody and then they spend time going through their belongings, robbing the place. Those are situations often, right, where you'll see really heavy blood transfer. But I think in a quick attack like this, not necessarily a ton of blood on the bottom of his shoes. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think DM and BF witnessed him. And I'm really curious about the phone, the forensic information on the phone. I'm not quite sure what that is. Something, they mentioned that a forensic analysis of the phones makes them believe that the crimes occurred at a certain time. And what is it? I'm curious. Could there be a video or audio? Is it possible that when Dylan heard what she heard, she started recording? We've heard talk about audio and, going on right now in the pretrial hearings. Yeah, so Sirius says, can't wait to hear from Bethany and Dylan. And yeah, I wonder how much they're going to try to protect them, in the trial as witnesses. I don't know. I'm curious how that's going to play out. And I don't know if they're going to, get up on the stand and say what happened. I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out. I'm with you on that. Yeah, there's some evidence in there that we don't know about, that the defense knows about. And you heard them say it, at the end of that hearing, you heard them say they have evidence. They're not happy about how they got the evidence, but they have evidence against Bryan. And they're going to use it in the trial, is what the defense said. So again, anybody who kind of says, hey, they don't have any evidence on Bryan, they have evidence. His own defense team has said they have evidence. They're just not happy with where they got the evidence from. We don't know what it is, but that was I think they slipped up a little bit there when she lost her cool. I think Bryan's attorney there slipped up a little bit and revealed, that there is something there. No, so Twizzle, good point, Twizzle Stick. So Twizzlestick says it doesn't say it's against Bryan. Yeah, but she says that the prosecution has evidence and they're going to use it at trial. I don't think it's going to be exculpatory evidence for Bryan that the defense is upset that they're going to be using at trial against Bryan, right? I think they're challenging the way they got that evidence because they don't want that evidence at trial. So it's not beneficial to Bryan. They haven't flat out said they have evidence against Bryan, but it's pretty clear that they have evidence against Bryan. Oh, Angel. Thanks for this one. Kelly at Watts, the obsession was told BF said BF saw someone across the front parking lot. Yeah. So could she have looked out her window and heard something up there? Could she have fired up her camera or her phone even? A lot of mysteries out there. But I do want to give a shout out to Watts, the obsession. When I had about 5,000 subscribers, Kelly reached out to me and was very supportive and really helped me out. If you have not checked out Watts, the obsession, that's a good channel. She's very nice. Check out her channel, please, if you haven't already. I have to reach out to her and say hi. Thanks for calling that out, Angel. She has some really good content on the Watts case that happened out in Colorado. Chris Watts. Yeah, so Richie says can't get women. I don't know if he necessarily can't get women. We haven't heard of any women coming forward saying they really dated Bryan other than the Tinder date that we had heard about. But there's been witnesses who said that he actually approached some women at that pool party and was able to get their phone numbers. Now, what happened after that, we don't know. Maybe they gave him the wrong number, right? Who knows? Maybe that's another little slight that happened to Bryan. Maybe he picks up these girls' numbers and he goes to call them and it's like, dude, we're sorry. Jeff says, why are your shelves empty? Because I haven't decided yet what to put on there. Any ideas? I need some ideas on what to put on my shelves, everybody. You know what else I need to do? Yeah, the lights aren't turning on either. But I need that YouTube. That's what I need, Jeff. I need that little YouTube sign. I only got about 80,000 subscribers to go. Yeah, Angel. Funko Pops. Okay. Maybe a Bryan Kohberger bobblehead. Angel says, Angel, I do have a knife collection. So I don't know. I feel like YouTube will look down on me if I do that. So everybody, it was a great live tonight. It's always good to see you. I'm going to hang out here for a bit more and chat. So feel free to hang out as long as you would like. Kind of talk through my talking points for tonight's video. But if there's anything else that you would like to bring up, drop it in the chat. And if you have any questions about what I talked about tonight, definitely bring that up. Again, I'll be on the Drunk Turkey Show Friday night as well. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, so Kim says in the beginning thought it was a attempted essay. Yeah, initially, when we didn't know the timeline, I think that was definitely a question mark. But looking at the way it kind of unfolded, I kind of leaned away from that, and I feel like it was almost more of an anger, revenge type of almost an outburst type attack. But I don't know. I mean, without seeing all of the evidence, that's the thing. We're looking from the outside. If we saw the evidence they had, even just a sliver of like the crime scene or something, it could really unveil a lot of other things, right? So it's just really challenging with the limited amount of information that we have to know. And they can flat out lie about evidence as well. Thank you, Sirius. Yeah, please hit that like button, everybody. Do me a favor, everybody, leave some touch DNA on the like button for me. Yeah, Mike, I think a combination. So, whoops. Mike says, I wonder if he was mad or if he wanted a rush from. I think it was a mix. I think he had been thinking about this for a long time. Something like this, maybe not this exact case. This he may have formulated this attack, leading up. But I think in his mind, of course, there had been previous thoughts and things, and I think there was a certain amount of a rush involved and a pursuit of this experience. I have some other weird theories on this stuff too. When I talk about like a pursuit on this experience, sometimes I don't make videos because I don't want to weird people out too much, but with some of my theories here, but I do think there could have been this underlying, anger in addition to, the rush that he would have gotten from it. Angel says dust, shelves of dust. It's got the grate though. It doesn't really. Regina says, I thought you disappeared. Yeah. It's funny. I had put up quite a few videos leading up to that, or at least a handful. And yeah, a lot of people I don't know how that whole algorithm thing works. I just post them and try to do the best I can. And I don't know how all that, the YouTube algorithm and why people don't get notified. And it's just baffled. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Jeff says driving around alone at night. Yeah. Dark thoughts, not knowing what's going through his head. Definitely an interest in committing crime. He did that survey. I mean, I think we would all agree that would be interesting, right? Imagine if you could get a survey of all these people out who kind of told you how they committed these crimes. I'm pretty sure that was an interesting read through. So big hearing tomorrow, everybody. We'll see what's going on there. There's mention of discussion about taking the death penalty off the table. I wonder if that's going to be argued, and then we'll see if they set a trial date. Maybe. I think the previous hearing before that, we had heard that they actually had resolved quite a bit of these motions to compel that the defense was requesting, and there were a few pending items there that they're probably pretty close to wrapping up if they haven't already. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. I do have to work, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on that hearing tomorrow, and I'll be doing a video, of course, just to kind of talk through anything interesting that comes up that we learn. So I'm sure we're all looking forward to that hearing tomorrow. Yeah, great point, Jeff. Yeah, so answers to the questions can give you insight into how to succeed, right? All right, everybody. So hopefully I will see you Friday. Keep an eye out. I'm pretty sure DTS will be posting that live for Friday. I'll be sure to link it on my channel as well. And then hopefully I can have him on my channel maybe the following week. We'll get together. Really appreciate everybody tuning in, all of your support. Don't forget to hit that like button, everybody. Subscribe if you like the channel. I'll see you very soon. I'm going to, again, be on Friday, and I'll actually be able to get a couple of lives out next week, maybe 2 or 3. So keep an eye out, and I'll see everybody then. Have a good night, Tori. Harlot. Night, everybody.